Well, I've been invited to work as an advisor on the climate change negotiations to the very small Afghan delegation. They have 3 representatives apart from me here, so 4 in total, trying to follow these extremely complex negotiations. So it's a real challenge for Afghanistan and all the other least developed countries which have small delegations, but who are the most vulnerable to climate change.
Give us a quick idea about how many strands of negotiations there are and how hard, therefore, it is for smaller countries to cope with the sheer volume. I imagine there's reams of paperwork, even though this is a paperless conference, that you have to cover as well.
Well, there's reams of electronic paperwork. There's 20-page documents, and there's probably at least 20 streams going on across various areas, many of which are really important. If I'd say all of which are really important to least developed countries, whether it's loss or damage, where we can't adapt and we're losing agricultural land, to mitigation, where we have to rapidly reduce global emissions. As New Zealand put in negotiations the other day, loss and damage is putting an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but we need a strong fence at the top of the cliff. In other words, reduce emissions rapidly so we don't get such severe global warming.
And I know in your capacity with Afghanistan, you've been working a bit on, I think it's called the Shared Vision. Is that a document or a strategy? Give us a bit of an idea about that and what kind of themes you've been exploring.
Well, the Shared Vision, believe it or not, was launched in 2007 in Bali as part of the Bali Action Plan. It was agreed that globally we need a shared vision to address climate change. So we need to know that emissions are going to peak soon because they've been rising for the 20 years since we agreed the UNFCCC convention. Global emissions are probably about 25 to 30% above when we signed the convention in Rio in 1992. So we need emissions to peak rapidly or peak soon so that we can limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and then we need them to fall rapidly. We actually need them to fall to virtually 0 by 2050 because we have created so much warming already and there's a lag effect in the atmosphere. There's a good report came out this morning about how the polar ice caps are melting, which will contribute to rising sea level. And strangely enough, the least developed countries which are around the equator will suffer most for rising sea level because the water accumulates at the equator due to planetary physics that I've learned about here at the summit.
And I imagine as part of the Shared Vision talks, the word equity comes in from time to time. It's such a short word, but it seems so problematic in these talks. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's 3 main elements that come into shared vision. First, which I talked about, was peak year, which we need to have emissions coming down rapidly from 2015. The global emission reduction target, which needs to be at least 80% below pre-industrial levels, or 80% below 1990 levels by 2050, and then how we share that target. So the US, the richest country, well, actually it's no longer the richest country, but the richest developed country, or one of the richest developed countries, represents 20% of global emissions, which is actually about the same as China. But their population is only a quarter of China, so their per capita emissions are 4 times the Chinese level. And the GDP per capita in the US is about 5 times Chinese levels. So the US obviously has to do more to address emissions, has to take much bigger emission reduction targets than China. China has still hundreds of millions of people living in poverty and are trying to develop the economy, but are doing quite a bit already to move to renewable energy. They can do a lot more. They're still a very much coal-fired electricity economy, as is the US, as is Australia, regrettably. So we have to move rapidly away from coal-generated electricity and fossil fuel-generated electricity to renewables, whether it be wind power, wave power, geothermal, solar thermal, a whole range of renewable technologies that are already feasible. And we can power the planet with these technologies. The science is already in that we can clearly power the planet with these technologies. So it's how that reduction to more than 80% by 2050 is shared between the countries is the equity issue, taking into account that we've got many poor countries in the world, such as Afghanistan, which will suffer most from climate change, but has virtually 0 emissions. In global terms, less than 0.2% of global emissions.
And let's finish on Afghanistan. How big? I mean, it's such a troubled country, and there's so many issues there. How high on the agenda do you think climate change is with the government and with people in the country?
Well, they've been making strong efforts. Afghanistan, along with regrettably the US, which was much more important party, is one of the two countries who have not ratified the Kyoto Protocol. Afghanistan has got the Kyoto Protocol ratification through its Parliamentary Assembly, and it will be signed shortly by the President. So Afghanistan will become a signatory to the Kyoto Protocol. It's developed a national adaptation plan to climate change. So Afghanistan is doing a lot of work in this area. It's time other countries did a lot more work in this area.